Graphic Medicine Podcast. My name is M.K. Serwick, and with Ian Williams, I co-run graphicmedicine.org, a website dedicated to the intersection of comics, health, wellness, body, caregiving. On today's show, an introduction to graphic medicine given by Ian Williams at the Wellcome Centre Library in London not long ago that we thought would be great to share with you. I'm going to put images into the feed, so if you're able to take a look at images, they should show up in conjunction with the audio. Before we begin the show, I do want to say that support for this podcast comes from the Penn State College of Medicine, Department of Humanities, the nation's oldest humanities department within a medical school, and we're very grateful for their support. Without further ado, let's listen to Ian introduce us to graphic medicine. And coming up next episode of the podcast, hopefully not too long from now, will be Hilary Schute's keynote from the 2017 Seattle Graphic Medicine Conference.
On graphic medicine, which is another area. I think a lot of you have heard me talk a bit about collection development around our art and health initiative, and so graphic medicine is another area where we've been collecting, but rather than listen to me, I thought I'd invite a special guest in, who's Ian Williams. I'm going to hand over to him and he'll explain why I think it was better for him to speak.
Thanks Melanie, thank you for inviting me along. I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes. I'm going to try and answer the question, what is graphic medicine? And then I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes about, I suppose, my perception of how, my ideas about how comics and science and healthcare what we can do with comics within this area. So I set up and I run the graphicmedicine.org website. I'm a GP part-time. I do 2 days a week in Brighton. I'm a cartoonist. I did a book called The Bad Doctor, which came out in 2014. I'm co-author of the Graphic Medicine Manifesto. I think you've got both of these in the bookshop through there. And in your collection. Thank you. The Wellcome Collection and the Wellcome Trust has been very kind of supportive all the way along, really. And for a couple of years I did a strip in The Guardian called Sick Notes, where I had to respond to what was in the news, mostly about kind of Jeremy Hunt and things. So as somebody asked on Twitter, somebody sort of said on Twitter last week, I think, so graphic medicine is a thing, is it? And I kind of replied, because I tweet as graphic medicine, yes, it is a thing. But what kind of thing is it? So, well, graphic medicine it's a section in your book, in the bookshop, through there. So Marion has been very supportive of graphic medicine right from the beginning, and sort of created a nice little section and really kind of started stocking books. It's the website. So we have, the website's been running since 2007. I did an MA in Medical Humanities, and I started to write about comics and healthcare, and rather than sort of get down to writing my dissertation, I kind of put all my notes online and made a website. And through that, people started getting in touch from all over the world. And it's kind of just doing that, which was kind of a bit of it's like a procrastination sort of move, really, because I didn't want to get down to the kind of writing the dissertation. That sort of really changed my life and put me in touch with what has grown into an amazing community of people. So we sort of try and list and review anything that we feel is relevant to healthcare, disability, that is in the sort of basically in the form of a comic or a graphic novel or a web comic or things like that. It's run by, I mean, it's a kind of labour of love. It's run by me and my colleague MK Serwick, who's based in Chicago, and we do it sort of when we have time. So it's a bit of a kind of, you know, we could do with, you know, professionalising it and kind of updating it, but we kind of do our best and we get other people to write reviews. And we're active on social media, and MK does a podcast, not every week, but kind of fairly regularly. It is a book series from Penn State Press. Two of my colleagues, Susan Squire and Michael Green, work at Penn State University, and they've been very supportive. They sort of bought into this idea and thought that it would be good to have a graphic medicine book series to put out original graphic novels and to put out academic volumes that, you know, look at this area as well. So Susan and I are series editors for the graphic medicine book series. It's a sort of area of study. Michael Green and Kimberly Myers wrote this article for the BMJ. That was in 2010, the same year as we held our first conference in London. And it is an educational thing. Various people involved in the community use comics to in medical or healthcare education. So Michael Green gets his medical students to read comics, to discuss them, and ultimately to make them. I've done the same. I used to run a module in Manchester Medical School when I was working up there, and these were medical students who were kind of making comics from their experience as medical students. So they're making autobiographical works. My colleague MK Serwick is a nurse who's allied to Northwestern Medical School, the bioethics department. She's a comics artist in residence there. So she runs a yearly module, again with, I think, medical and nursing students and medical humanities students, looking at comics, getting them to make comics. And various people, I mean, this is kind of expanding. Mostly, it has to be said, more in the States than over here, but there is sort of quite a lot of people now running modules within their kind of medical healthcare curriculum. We've done things like, this was a public art display. This was part of the SICK Festival, which again received money from the Wellcome Trust down in Brighton a couple of years ago. We took patients' perspectives and we took healthcare professionals' perspectives. We made comics out of them. We mounted them on either side of light boxes and put them in the middle of town, and they were seen by thousands of people. But maybe most of all, it's a kind of community. So we hold yearly conferences. The first was in London in 2010. I organised that one, and we were a group of people that were kind of talking online and emailing, all interested in what comics might do in the arena of healthcare, and we sort of said we should get together and hold a conference, and we thought that 25 to 30 people might turn up, and we held it in Senate House, and we had a capacity of 75, we had 75 people there, and it was an amazing buzz. And since then, we've held conferences in Chicago, Toronto, Brighton, Baltimore, Riverside, California, Seattle, Dundee. Then this year it was in Seattle. Next year it is in Vermont, and then we're going to do it in Brighton in 2019. And each year, the people that are kind of involved in organising these conferences have thought, oh God, it can't be as good as last year. It's going to be, and each year it has been amazing. We get new people coming, and just the kind of buzz that goes on there has been, sort of well, very exciting, and something that we've all been like really proud to be involved with. So Melanie came to Seattle this year. That's why I'm speaking to you now, I guess. And it was a great event.
It was
fantastic.
I definitely recommend it.
So this was the first one that we held in London was, again, the Wellcome Trust gave us a sort of grant to run it. We ran it on like £3,500, and we which was sort of very modest sum, and it just was great. And since then, as I say, we've had them in these other places, and a few kind of small pop-up ones, like we had something as part of Leeds Thought Bubble. We did a small conference there, and this is next year in Vermont. And the people in Vermont, White River Junction, the Centre for Cartoon Studies, have really taken this on board, and this is James Stern, who's organising next year's conference. And they have been working, they've really taken this idea on board, and they have been working using comics as a sort of therapeutic intervention, working with the local Veterans Association, working with vets, getting them to make comics, autobiographical comics about their experiences, about their trauma, and seeing how that works as a kind of a therapeutic, a therapeutic tool. And this is just a nice quote from James: "Comics are a therapeutic blowtorch, and so far we've only lit a few cigarettes with them." And the community that has been built we've kind of deliberately tried to keep it inclusive and non-hierarchical, and it composes of the people. I mean, the people that attend the conferences are cartoonists, healthcare practitioners, caregivers, scholars, librarians, medical illustrators, patients, people with disabilities, family members, general public. We've tried to encourage as wide a range of attendees as possible. We've tried to keep it sort of not, it's kind of, there are scholarly sort of veins to it, but we've also tried to include people from kind of, as equals, people from non-academic backgrounds, or from, people with direct experience, people who kind of make comics, people who read comics. And we've tried to avoid, well, so far we've kind of managed to run this thing without any kind of formal organisation. And each year there's a sort of, we've got this expanding, we don't even know what to call ourselves, a kind of steering committee or something that kind of each year we talk about. Every month we have conference calls on the phone, and we are thinking now that we're probably going to have to kind of formalise ourselves into what is in America is called a 501c3, which is like a non-profit organisation, so that we can actually have a bank account and kind of like hold funds, and we can apply for grants, and we can kind of protect the area really against sort of, I suppose, exploitation or takeover from institutions or corporations or whatever. So we kind of see ourselves as the guardians of this kind of area, without trying to kind of direct things too directly. In the Graphic Medicine Manifesto, I kind of defined graphic medicine using sort of artfully vague language as the interface between the medium comics and the discourse of healthcare. But various other people in the back of the manifesto, people have given their own definitions. So this is Dana Wellrath, who is one of the organisers of next year's conference. Around the world, comics artists, caretakers, parents, assorted onlookers are taking up their drawing tools, pens, papers, scissors and computers to depict illness and ways of being human that have been stigmatised. This is graphic medicine. So I'm just going to very briefly give you a rundown of where I think comics sort of fit into this. And I've tried to sort of gauge where to kind of pitch this. So this is kind of my, many of you will know a lot about comics or be into comics, but I guess this is my perspective. So I don't need to tell this audience that comics can be studied as cultural documents or primary sources or whatever you want to call them. If this is MD, which was from the EC comics from the Comics Code era, and if you don't know what the Comics Code is, if you Google that, you'll find a kind of interesting tale of censorship and moral kind of panic and book burning and what have you from America. Comics seem, the type of comics that I'm primarily interested in, which is kind of indie comics, autobiographical comics, seem to be a good medium for discussion of taboo subjects. And I think that this comes from the cultural background of autobiographical comics. They sort of come out of the underground comics of the 1960s and 70s, which necessarily dealt with very sort of personal and quite sort of, you know, sometimes very edgy subjects, and I think that has meant that autobiographical and indie comics often do sort of tread a sort of careful line dealing with like really taboo subjects. They are a source of patient information. This is the only superhero. I thought I'd included no superheroes in this kind of talk, but this is the only nod to superheroes in this talk, I guess. Comics are used in many institutions to help other sufferers. This is I Had a Black Dog, Matthew Johnson. It's been very successful. Debate whether you'd call this comic, I guess. It could be called a picture book instead. Comics as research. Nick Zisanis has just published his PhD thesis as a comic, which is like big kind of slab of a coffee table thing, sort of really dense. Pretty impressive work. Communication science, of course. This is a Wellcome project. Eddie Ross, based up in Glasgow, has been working with sort of scientists up there, parasitologists. This is the bit that I was, I guess, most interested in when I was doing my dissertation, relating the patient's experience. So comics and graphic novels that are made by people who have been through the patient experience. There are lots about cancer, there's lots about mental health, there's lots about quite a number of kind of areas. You know, there are areas that are kind of, there are very few comics about. But my feeling is that the most interesting comics are made by people who have, you know, been through the experiences they're talking about. And this is where I think, you know, the richness comes from, the richness of experience, the kind of, the way that these people, the way that people find new ways of kind of putting this experience over. We've wondered about whether making comics, making autobiographical work acts in some, you know, as therapy, if you like. This was Binky Brown Meets the Holy Virgin Mary, which I'm sure you've got in your collection, which is often regarded as the first autobiographical comic. It was like an underground comic. Justin Green, who came to one of our conferences in Riverside and talked there, he had really bad OCD, and he made this comic to sort of, his expectation was that if he made a comic about his experiences with OCD, then it would kind of exorcise the demons and cure him. It didn't, but it was a very, I mean, it remains, this was sort of made in 1971, and it remains a really sort of pure, I think, portrayal of kind of OCD. This was before OCD was really, people didn't know much about it, it wasn't talked about. It didn't really have a name. He called it an obsessive neurosis. And it sort of pretty much fits the experience of many people with OCD now. And lastly, I just wanted to mention, I like this quote from W.T. Mitchell, images do not just mirror the world, they help to build it. I think comics contribute to what Sandra Gilman calls the iconography of illness, in that people making autobiographical comics, comics artists, are constantly comics are by nature playful and often experimental, and what comics artists do is find new ways of portraying what is an internal experience or an external experience or whatever, but whatever they are going through or suffering, comics artists are inventive in kind of like coming up with new ways of portraying that. And I think that, this is Gabby Schultz, or Ken Dahl, as he published this book under Monsters, so this is about herpes. He, thinks up a new way to portray the way he's feeling. People read that, and that sort of contributes to the general kind of discussion, if you like, or the general way that the public perceive a specific illness. Sometimes for good, sometimes not for good. There's sort of like, opens up like lots of conversations about stigma, about kind of, all sorts of things. But nevertheless, they are kind of in some way creating new knowledge about disease and suffering. So in graphic pathographies, artists create their own iconography of illness. In doing so, they're creating new knowledge, combining subjective feelings and perceptions of the objective visual representation. So I'm going to leave it there. That is 20 minutes. And I'm very happy to answer any questions.
Anyone have questions?
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Graphic Medicine Podcast. For the latest publications, news stories, exciting things going on in graphic medicine, be sure to like the Graphic Medicine Facebook page. And on Fridays, look forward to Matthew No's This Week in Graphic Medicine posts, which are chock full of everything going on, social media, articles, book finds. He's really just doing an amazing job, and we're incredibly grateful for all his hard work. Follow us on Twitter, and really social media is one of the best ways to stay connected to the vast worldwide graphic medicine community. When you've done that, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast in iTunes, and if you're so inclined, if you could write a review, that would be super helpful. As I said, coming up on the next episode, hopefully would be the keynote address given by Hillary Shute at the Seattle conference. And just to remind you one more time, and it is my great pleasure, that the support for this podcast comes from the Penn State College of Medicine Department of Humanities. Thanks for listening.